Aloha everyone, I'm geologist Philip Ong, and here is this week's Hawaiian volcano summary. The story on Kilauea this week is much the same as last week. It's been another week without an eruption, although with continuing swelling and inflation and elevated earthquakes at the summit. As has been the case for over a month now, the buildup is continuing with elevated rates and could lead to a new intrusion, eruption, or resumption of the previous activity within short order. But it's important to note that all the signals are still at the summit. No signs of anything unusual in either of the rift zones of the volcano. You guys looking at a live look in at the webcam Kilauea summit now, showing that crater floor, all dark, but with quite a bit of volcanic gas coming out of here, producing this fog, this dark haze in the air here. That's the volcanic fume. Looking at this week's HVO USGS update, here's the one for from yesterday. We're showing that seismicity is still elevated, tilt-meters are returning gradual inflation, but no eruption and no active lava since March 7th. It has been since April 16th, since there's been small flurries of earthquakes irregularly beneath Hale-Ma'uma'u, Kanikakoi, and southern margin of the caldera, Kaluapele. More earthquake flurries are possible with those elevated rates. However, the most recent SO2 raid was 150 tons per day on the 16th, a couple of days ago. No unusual activity in either of the rift zones there. Looking at the signals here, here is our tilt signal for the last 2 days. You can see that we've had a net upwards inflation of the volcano over the last couple of days here, with a little bit of a bump in between, but if we zoom out, we can see that a little better. And that all fits into right in here. So you can see now that there was still a net increase for the last week, but we had a little bit of a ride with an inflation, then a deflation, inflation cycle perhaps, and now we're still higher than we started off the week. Looking at the whole last month, all of that week fits into right here at the right end. So small changes here with this extra pulse of magma, perhaps causing elevated earthquakes during that short time, similar to what we had back at the end of April and the beginning of March here, beginning of May, I'm sorry. So more importantly is the pattern that we have from -7 microradians, -7 to +6 here. So that's 13 microradians of inflation over the last month. And that's that upwards rising trend. That's the most important thing here. This volcano is still swelling at a pretty significant rate, even with these small changes being the ones that cause the extra quaking on the summit area. So here is that same time scale, last month earthquakes on the bottom, earthquakes per day on the right, on a vertical axis here. So there is that one from the end of April, beginning of May, where it reached 150 earthquakes per day. That was a largest value in the last month. We once again approached that here within the last week on the 12th, 6 days ago, where we're slightly below that, but a similar level. And really, all of the last week has been mostly above 100 earthquakes per day, with one exception. And that's higher than that previous week that we see that there were more in a range of 60 to 80 earthquakes per day back through here. So that corresponds to the slightly lower rate of inflation, and perhaps here a slightly higher rate of inflation. It looks pretty similar on the graphs right there. So just small variations. Overall, the pattern is it's still filling and going through these cycles of swelling and cracking and then adjusting. And not quite sure when it's going to give. Looking at this last week area right here on this graph, that bunch of earthquakes right in there, it's plotted on this map. And you can see that they mostly cluster around the summit of Kilauea here, right around the caldera. That's why that is still the expected area of impact right there. No activity of earthquakes within the rift zone right through there. You see some to the south. This is that south flank area that's still adjusting as a summit is trying to push towards the ocean because it's swollen there. And that's why we see some adjustments occurring in this upper east rift zone area all through here. Pahala earthquakes are still ongoing, but there's a delay and not a direct connection of predictability as far as these events occurring and something happening at the surface. So there's still happening in the background there. Magma is still coming into the volcano at a healthy rate, deep, deep, deep down. Looking at SO2 now, this is the last month. So tons per day on a vertical axis, the last month here on the bottom. Our most recent measurement at 150 tons per day is that one right there. But if you notice, on the 12th and 13th, right in here, there was a spike of SO2, over 400 tons per day on the 13th, and it looks like over 300 tons per day on a 12th. See, it's come back down to 150, and it was in that similar range of 200 to 100 prior to that. Right? This is more or less our elevated background right through here. That would suggest that that gas is coming from the magma somewhere, and the magma must have come close to the surface somewhere to release that gas to have it escape to the surface somehow. But it started and stopped, so the ground is still containing it, still adjusting and accommodating that growing pressure underground. So just goes to show that we are possibly getting close to breaking point there. It hasn't quite cracked all the way, but it looks like it might have if it hadn't been able to accommodate that pulse that caused this spike of gas right through here. So that all looks pretty dramatic because it was 3 times greater than that value we're seeing here. But in the grand scheme of things, this is over the last month. If we look over the last year here, the scale for the last year goes up to 14,000 tons per day. Not hundreds, but thousands. So when that last eruption began in January 2023, we actually reached somewhere in a range of 12,000, 13,000 tons per day. Dropped off pretty quickly, and have been coming down ever since, close to these 0 values. So our small little bump we saw this past week is just this right over here. So it goes from being at 150 to 400 to 150, and that's it. So just a small little blip. It's perhaps an important clue showing us magma is coming closer, but it's not quite the scale of what we'd see if the magma was actually coming all the way up to the surface and putting out thousands of tons per day. So maybe close, but not quite. Looking at that same last year timescale for earthquakes, coming back to the earthquakes here, you see here is the last 4 weeks, these elevated values right through here. We're looking at earthquakes per week on this vertical axis now over the last year. So this is our pre-January 23 buildup. So late December and very early January, the earthquakes were elevated in Kilauea summit. Eruption begins right there, and the earthquake rates drop because they're not bulging underground anymore, they're actually flowing onto the surface. Similar deal now, we see that we actually had, when its eruption ended in March, it got elevated beyond the eruption values. So here's during eruption, it's down here. Eruption ends, it steps up to here, it's rebuilding. And really the last 4 to 5 weeks, it's taken up a whole other notch right here, right? So we're now reaching 800 earthquakes per week, 700 earthquakes per week, 600 earthquakes per week, 500 earthquakes per week, and it looks like this week will end somewhere between 500 and 600 once again. So you see 5 weeks of that. It was maybe 6 weeks of it over here in January. It doesn't always go exactly the same pattern, but that's just a ballpark to give you an idea of how close it may actually be. And you can see that these rates of earthquakes are actually quite a bit higher than we saw at the beginning of the year, showing that it really is pressurized and anything could change quickly. Looking at the GPS on the summit, this is north and south across the caldera, showing that the two sides are getting further apart. As they get further apart, the distance increases, a line goes up. That's what this is showing here. So we're more interested in about whether it's going up a little slower or a little bit faster. And that's the important thing there. It has been still spreading pretty fast. Perhaps a little change here in the last few days and the last week. This is always hard to tell because these newest data sometimes get corrected. We only get 1 data point per day, so it can be hard to make out what's happening here, but it looks like it might actually have gone some little bit of a slacking in the last couple of days. Hard to tell that exactly. We'll look into that a little bit more. But to follow through to the rift zone, here is upper rift zone by Puo'o, showing the line going down, two sides getting closer together. So that area of the volcano is still sagging because magma is not going in there, and so this is one of the indications of no hazard to the lower east rift zone from these changes recently here. And along those same lines, here's a tilt at Puo'o. This is just over the last month now, but showing a similar deflation of the ground there. So everything is all quiet and calm and nothing to worry about in a lower east rift. However, to come back to this summit signal on the GPS, I thought it'd be interesting to look a little bit more detail. We look at the 2-year GPS, it's twice as long now. And these signals now have components on these particular graphs. So this is the east-west component, north-south component, and the up-down component. What we really want is the up-down component, and I want to show you guys the very, very last few data points. Remember, this is really compressed here, but within the last couple of weeks, it looks like it has come up pretty steep right there, right? And maybe it's come back down, maybe it's come up and down. There's a little bit of that lag and plotting and processing as well. But so the last couple of days maybe aren't showing up here, but you can see over the last week how it really has gotten pretty steep. This is Uikahuna, stationed to the northwest of Halema'uma'u. We look to the east. once again to the up component. The vertical also seems to have jumped a little bit higher. Moving around clockwise, there is in the southwest, the outlet. Its component is also rising vertically a little quicker there. And crater rim finally there as well, also rising a little quicker. So all these stations around the summit are all rising quicker than right before. You can see that there are times when there are little variations, but when it gets to that level of steepness, that's usually something real in the data, like you see right in here, preceded September 2021 when it got really steep like that. Could be some time to come still, but it's just going to show how it really is bulging on all the signals, including the GPS here as well. So one last thing to share on the tilt. This is a tilt for the last month at Uikahuna in the northwest, but south of there, southwest of the caldera at Sand Hill, there's also a functioning tilt meter, just showing a similar pattern, inflation over all of the last month coming up here. It's interesting to note that some of these signals, like this deflation inflation signal that's more prominent at the summit here, is not as prominent over here at Sand Hill. So we see a little bit of it flattening and then rising again, right? But not quite the same effect. Suggesting that some of these patterns are a little bit more localized, right? And the other thing you can see on the Sand Hill station is a lot of these spikes coming down that have that characteristic look of an earthquake. Sometimes you can have instrument malfunctions or something else causing these as well. We do know that there is that Vibra-sized truck driving through the area, but given how consistent these signals have been over the whole last month here, I would suggest it's probably not that. But either earthquakes happening in this area, southwest of the summit, or it's something with that instrument itself, right? But seeing as we've seen all the earthquakes on a map in that area as well, that suggests that you're seeing more of these micro earthquakes occurring in that area of the volcano. It seems to be quaking a little bit more than some of the others. So it's an area to keep an eye on as this thing gets ready to pop here. So just to keep those month-long plots in mind, this great inflation over the last month here. Let's turn back to the last couple of examples. This is a plot from September 2021 showing that same month-long large inflation. There was an earthquake, magnitude 3-ish right in there, that actually caused it to break, and that's when eruption actually begins. So you can see if you're looking for any changes in the actual tilt plot, these little ups and little downs, they're not really telling you a whole lot. When it goes really strong, and it'll change either when an earthquake or some big signal like that. Right? In this case, it was a big earthquake, then causing the deflation signal that's characteristic of eruption happening, lava making it out of the ground there. That was September 2021, and just one more. Here's January 2023, and we had a little bit more of a deflation-inflation cycle background occurring, but the overall pattern still is one of long-term inflation, and in that case also magnitude 3-ish, 3.5 earthquake caused the ground to break, and then we have that eruption, lava coming out of the ground signal afterwards. So we're still waiting for that. Maybe the big earthquake might be what happens again, or some other pulse that actually causes the ground to break here. But that's where we are. Similar analog to what we see these last couple of times, and just waiting for something to change on the surface here. Underground, it's still showing all the signs. That's it for Kilauea. Wait and see once again. All is still quiet at Maunaloa, no major changes from last week. And that is our Hawaiian volcano summary for this week. If you're looking for a longer live update, unfortunately, we're not able to do that this week due to internet issues. So check back with us next week, and we will come back to you with another live update on Thursday. Unless, of course, something happens in between. If the volcano does erupt, we'll cut in with a live update whenever that does happen. Mahalo, everyone. From HawaiiTracker.com, I'm geologist Philip Ong. Aloha.